Our guest speakers today in this plenary session are Mike Wesch from Kansas State University and Sylvia Bonge from California, Berkeley. I won't bore you by reading you the brief biographies that you find in your brochure, in your program. I will say that I've found my exchanges with them in emails and the work that we did finding out who they are before we invited them to come. All of this together has shaped my understanding of teaching. The question for the day, what does excellence in teaching mean at BC, is a big question. It's a question that each of us addresses individually, but it's also a question that we need to address as a community. I understand that excellent teaching, there's a sense in which excellent teaching is excellent teaching, regardless of the time and place. I also think that there are elements of who we are as a university, whether that's our Jesuit heritage, our emphasis on the liberal arts, our emphasis on undergraduate education, our approach, our attempt to hold research and teaching together in what can be a very productive tension or a very tense production. I like that. All of these things together shape our understanding of excellence in teaching. As you listen this morning to Mike and Sylvia, I would encourage you to do what you can to bring their voices into our conversation. I suspect there will be things that they say that you find make you just a little bit uncomfortable. You might want to challenge them. They might say things that help you understand more deeply some of your successes in the classroom or some of the things that have not gone quite so well. Please see their talks this morning as the opening gambits in this stage of the conversation about excellence in teaching at BC. We've asked Mike to address the question, how does the real but virtual world in which we and our students live shape teaching and learning today? We've asked Sylvia to address the question, what does the science of learning have to say about the practice of teaching university students? The plan is for each of them to speak for perhaps 30 to 40 minutes, and then we might ask them to speak to each other very briefly, and then the rest of the morning we will open it up to the larger conversation. So please, as you listen to them speak, be alert to the questions that come up in your mind. Be alert to the challenges that you want to put before us, and be ready to join in the conversation. Are you set? Mike.
All right, good morning, everybody. Like many of you, I'm in finals week and just finished up my semester last week. And I had a semester that kind of challenged my own assumptions in a lot of positive ways. I had a very, very successful semester, and I did some new things, and I'm trying to now process like what went right. It was a very, very good semester for me. And so a lot of what I'm going to say is kind of off the cuff, just kind of feeling out, trying to figure out what went so right about this semester. But John asked me to reflect on what the virtual world has to do with teaching and learning, and what is good teaching and learning in this virtual space. So if you look around us today, I mean, in many ways, we see people, we see buildings and so on, but in the air all around us are all of these things as well. These things are literally in the air all around us, and we have access to them through multiple devices. And this has a certain effect. And I want to bring up a sort of a paradox right from the beginning. It starts here. These are some dinosaurs that started attacking families' cupboards around midnight every night in Kansas City. And they would take these pictures, and actually, of course, what they're doing is they're playing a joke on their kids, and every night they would go and arrange all their plastic dinosaurs in different ways and then take a picture and Instagram it, and pretty soon they had this huge following. Just night after night. And then this goes viral. It gets on the Today Show, and of course then it goes really viral, and this whole thing becomes Dinovember, and thousands of people, parents all over the world start joining in. So if you went to Twitter, you would get you just look for hashtag Dinovember, and you get these tons of pictures. And it represents so much of what's great about the internet, that somebody can do something creative, and it can spread so fast and create such a wonderful thing. So they asked the originators of this, Reef and Susan Tuma of Kansas City, why did you do this? And they said, well, why? Because in the age of iPads and Netflix, we don't want our kids to lose their sense of wonder and imagination. In a time when the answers to all the world's questions are a web search away, we want our kids to experience a little mystery. All it takes is some time and energy, creativity, and a few plastic dinosaurs. This is something, this word here, wonder, which is so essential to this moment. Seymour Papert saw it coming 25 years ago. He was over at MIT before this existed, and he went out and he started studying 4-year-olds. He was interested in how 4-year-olds learn. So he went to a preschool, and at the preschool they found out that he was from South Africa, and they got all excited, and they said, oh, we were just discussing this. How do giraffes sleep? And he didn't know how giraffes slept, even though he's from South Africa, and he thought, I should know this, but he couldn't think of it. And then he went home that night, and this is 1990, and he had an advantage that none of those kids had, which was a wall full of books, including encyclopedias. So he starts rifling through those and trying to find the answer to how giraffes sleep, and he still couldn't find the answer. But then he mused, and this was part of a book he wrote in 1993, he mused that it wouldn't be long before these kids would actually have access to thousands of videos, thousands of pictures of how giraffes sleep, and they would access them through simple hand gestures, which is to say, he saw all this 25 years ago, and of course it's true. So if you pick up a phone today and you use a few hand gestures, you can pull up giraffe sleeping, you'll get 59,000 YouTube videos. If that doesn't tell you how giraffes sleep and you want something more sort of scholarly, you can go pick up this, and you can see here that the positioning of the paradoxical sleep was recognized by the peculiar positioning of the head on the croup. And if you don't know what a croup is, you can go to Google Images and you can look for giraffe sleeping, and now you know what a croup is. And these things basically signify these two sides of the internet. It's amazing. It's what Seymour Papert actually coined this idea that it's the knowledge machine. But he also pointed out that without a sense of wonder and curiosity, it is not the world's greatest knowledge machine, it's the world's most seductive distraction device. And that's the fundamental issue that we have today. So this media landscape is changing very quickly. Some of you may be familiar with Yik Yak. This is one of the big crazes now on campuses. This is like an anonymous message board. It's location-based. So I can come into Boston College here and I can pull up Yik Yak and I can see what all the Boston College students are talking about. Here's one. Do you ever go on YouTube to watch a music video and then 2 hours later are watching a tutorial on how to talk to giraffes? This is like perfectly signifies this moment of distraction versus knowledge possibility. So we know where these two knowledge machines collide, the great university and this stuff in the air that creates this other knowledge machine, we find, unfortunately, distraction. We find students working, texting through class and so on. Here's another Yik Yak for you. College, where you pay a load of tuition to stare at your phone in class for a month and teach yourself half a semester in a night. So this sort of signifies that problem. Now, from a teaching perspective, I think we often look at technology mostly in terms of information and knowledge sharing. And so we look at this and we say, look, this is just the beginning. We're headed towards ubiquitous computing, ubiquitous communication, ubiquitous information at a limited speed about everything, everywhere, from anywhere, and all kinds of devices. That's the sort of general view of the next 5 to 10 years. And that means that it's now ridiculously easy to connect, organize, share, collect, collaborate, and publish with anybody to anybody in the world. And that means exams like this seem increasingly out of place. So I'm really into this idea of wonder and curiosity, realizing that, there's so much information I can deliver during a lecture, but if I can deliver inspiration, a sense of curiosity, motivation, so on, then perhaps those students will engage in some kind of lifelong learning. But they need questions. Somehow I have to generate those beautiful questions that create that quest within them, where they want to just keep going and asking question after question. So early on when I started teaching, about 10 years ago, I started paying attention to the questions my students were asking. And about midway through my first semester of teaching, I paused and listened to the questions, and the questions were things like, how many points is this worth? How long does this paper need to be? What do we need to know for this test? Like, these are terrible, right? And they're not going to inspire that kind of lifelong learning that I wanted. So then I got interested in, how do you move students from that framework to somewhere else. And so I started diving into the literature on student development theory. So starting with William Perry at Harvard, some in the 60s, on to Belinkie and Clinchy, Women's Ways of Knowing, and so on. And this is a very quick model of what they were saying, what's been said for the last 50 or 60 years in this field. So basically, the idea is that students come in and they have a sort of receptive type of knowledge pattern where they're just looking for the answers. They tend to see the world in black and white, and there are right answers and wrong answers, and your job as a teacher is to deliver the answers so they can memorize them for the exam. Once they get to college, they start to get frustrated with professors because they pose questions. And they view these as posed, like they are not real questions. You are posing these, and they're annoying because just tell me the answers so I can answer them on the exam. Eventually, they start to realize that these are not all posed questions, that there is real controversy. In every field, there's controversy, and there's actually a frontier of knowledge, and it's messy out there. But they still believe that, sooner or later we'll figure it out. As long as we have the right theory or the right bits of information, we can still get back to that world of black and white. By their junior year or so, that bubble is burst, and they realize there's true ambiguity in the world. A lot of times this actually happens through a personal crisis, where they realize that there are no clear right or wrong answers to something in their personal life. But that extends also to our fields as well. There's always ambiguity surrounding these frontiers of knowledge, and it gets very messy out in that region. What we hope happens in this space is that those students can actually learn to appreciate that ambiguity, come to be comfortable within that ambiguity, because that's where all the insight comes. That's where all the exciting stuff is happening, and that's where they can emerge then into a phase of wonder. That's where you've actually kind of appreciate that ambiguity, you thrive on it, and you find it as a space to play and learn and so on. And so that's where we want to get students ultimately. Unfortunately, what happens typically when students hit that ambiguity is they sort of crush back in, and they go hiding back into this world of black and white, and they often revert back to the same notions that they held as they came into college. So there's a certain pattern here, and the type of learning that the students are doing is leading to a certain type of expertise. And the type of learning that the students are doing when they're in that black and white world, you might call it strategic learning. They're simply like trying to figure out how to get the answers so they can get the A, and that leads to routine expertise. They become very good at doing problems that have already been posed, that there's already a script for, that they can apply the formula for, and so on. But if we can move them out past ambiguity into this phase of wonder, that's where we find them doing a different kind of learning, this deep learning, where they're actually playing a bit and understanding concepts, manipulating concepts, taking responsibility for the concepts they're using and understanding why they're using them. And once they're doing that deep learning, they develop an adaptive expertise, a capacity to actually engage in problems they had never seen before and apply things that they learned in other contexts to new contexts. Obviously, that's the kind of expertise that we need and that we want for our students. So then I started trying to figure out, well, what are the conditions in which students feel inspired and safe to go into this phase of wonder? And so I started looking at both my own experiences with wonder as well as those of students. I started interviewing a lot of students and came to the conclusion that there were three very broad elements. There's a lot more than this, but these are the main ones that are there when you're in this phase of wonder. One is the sense of a quest. You have this sense of purpose, where the question, it's like there's a question, but the answer to that question is just another question, and that fills you with joy. Like, it doesn't frustrate you. You're just like, great, let's keep moving on this quest. The second piece is that you're open to making connections both with new material and with other people. Instead of just trying to be right, you actually enjoy being wrong, because it means that there's other possibilities, and you get excited about that, and you start moving around through these different connections. And the third piece is that you feel that you start taking chances, you feel a freedom to fail, you feel okay about being vulnerable and being out there on the edge and doing these things. So those are then the things that I took to try to implement into my classes. So for example, in my big class, I thought, well, a lot of those things, quest, making connections, taking chances, those are things that kids naturally do when they're at play. I have 3 young children, and I see them playing, and I think, they naturally do that at play. So what if I put these students at play on really big, serious problems. And so one of the things we did is we started creating a simulation. So I teach anthropology, which is the study of all humans in all times and all places. And so, well, that's a big topic, I know. So let's try to create a simulation where everything that you're out there learning about the interactions of humans across time could be put into a simulation, into a game, and you guys get to design the game. So we create this big Google document, and we just start hashing out ideas of how we could create a game. And then we spread out all over campus, and we actually play the game. And in this version, for example, it's different every year, but in this version, we spread out all over campus, and then some people get rubber bands, some people get straws, some people get marshmallows. And then you can trade these items, and you create this global trade network, which then gets interrupted by people with guns who have these PVC things that can shoot marshmallows, and they go out and they colonize people and so on. It's crazy and it seems strange, but if you go to my workshop, I'll show you a bit more about that. The nice thing about this particular one was that the students stopped asking those silly questions like what's going to be on the test, and they actually started asking some really interesting, deep questions about how the world works. This is another college. This is a College of Landscape Architecture, which I came in to help them with a project in which we canceled classes for 2 days, and we sent everybody around town, and they mapped the town not based on cars, but based on people travel, walking and biking. And so we marked all the bike racks, and we measured curb lane width and traffic speeds and so on to get a sense of how comfortable it is to walk or bike on these streets. We rated each street from green all the way to red. Red is not so comfortable, green is very comfortable. And in the process, developed a whole new plan for the city, which has been implemented over the last 5 years, and we are now a bicycle-friendly community. So these are all things where questing, connection, and taking chances were all implemented. But my favorite one is actually this. This is a smaller class that I teach. And what I did here was just try to blow the doors off a traditional syllabus altogether. I threw it up on a wiki. I let anybody edit it. And so from the very beginning, we're setting goals together. And our goal is always to create something of great public value of some kind. And in general, we're usually making a documentary, or this year we're making a video game, things like that. And you can see what happens is that the reading list actually gets so big on the main syllabus that nobody can handle it. So they start breaking it up, and students started blogging. This is all on their own. I had nothing to do with this. They started blogging their own syllabi. So they're assigning themselves books. Here you can see a student has assigned herself 4 books in 5 weeks. If I assign 4 books in 5 weeks, I get rebellion. But she's that excited. And then other students start following suit, 4 books in 5 weeks, 4 books in 5 weeks. And in the end, we've had some great success. We've had some videos get a lot of good press, lots of views. But the best part is what happens to the students. You can see here, this is from 2011. We put a lot of good thoughts together today in class. It's one of the sweetest class periods I think I've ever been a part of. No teacher. She says, so it's crazy, right? It was actually really sweet. We had the whiteboards covered with spiderweb diagrams, lists and connections, ideas we were all posing, and so on. But I love the last line here. She says, we're always being shaped, always learning. What is learning? I'm learning right now, processing, learning how to communicate my thoughts, typing speed increasing. She goes on and on here. And I asked her about this later, and she said this was like a moment for her in which she transformed from somebody who's just going for the A to somebody who's really excited about learning. So there's a shift. Parker Palmer talks about it as a shift from the expert delivering the object of knowledge to the amateurs to this space where we all come in as knowers. We know we all are knowers, and then we engage with each other as well as a subject in a living, vibrant conversation. So then I took this one step further a few years ago, and this leads me to the transformative semester I had this year. And that is I started having this class actually held inside a continuing care nursing home in our community. So the students actually lived inside the nursing home for the semester. And it's sort of like what we're trying, this is anthropology where we do field work. This is my fieldwork site in Papua New Guinea. I wanted them to actually have this sense of what it is to sit with people radically different from you and come to love them and then try to write about them or make a documentary about them. And so this is one of the students reflecting on that experience here.
them as like 20-year-olds. Like it's not, you don't just get to walk into a different culture and experience something. You can't just go to New Guinea and do that, but we found a way to do it in a culture that's right with us. In other classes, I sit next to people that I have no idea who their names are, and I just like we get in awkward groups for something, and it's like, oh, what do you have for this? And it's just, I don't know. This class, it's like, it's a family. Like, we are so tight, and it's good that we live right next to each other, because we're always in each other's rooms. Yeah, we text about everything. There's always, like, someone will find something new, and we'll collaborate with someone else, and you get to read all these notes about people that are, like, experiencing something different than you are. And it's super cool because like you can see it all coming together right before your eyes, and you can see everyone like changing because of it.
And to give you a sense of what this looks like in a final project,
I was born November the 12th, 1931.
No, I was born in 1934.
I was born in 1923.
I was born in 24.
Mother had all us children at home. Doctor came out and delivered us.
We were all born at home, no hospital.
I was born and raised on a farm.
Middle of the road, dry land farm. Dad always kept it up.
That was a very innocent time of my life.
So this is a 10-minute video, so I'm speeding it up and cropping stuff out. Basically, they got over 100 hours of audio footage, and then they went out and they actually tried to have empathy for those moments these people lived by filming them, going to the war, coming back, having kids, raising kids, retiring, and then ultimately having a fall that sends them into the retirement home.
When you're a caregiver for a long time, it runs you down. He went to sleep that night and never did wake up.
And he died the last part of January. He just died in his sleep, basically. And he just lived like he always did. But you can't get him back.
That was hard. Because I really, really missed him. Boy, I missed him. It just hit me that way. He wasn't him. To live in this world,
you must be able to do three things.
to love what is mortal,
To hold it against your bones.
knowing that your own life depends on it.
And when the time comes,
To let it go.
let it go.
So this video was very successful, and Kinsey and Jordan just got back from Paris, showing it in Paris. But like I always tell them, it's, you know, the video's great, but what's really special is what's happened to them. And what's happened to them is that they found that space to quest, make connections, and take chances. They went on a great journey. And if you look at what happened to Jordan right after that project, he got on his bike and he started riding to Mexico and on into Oaxaca and into Colombia. He just got back. Kinsey went off and traveled all over Europe, discovered that bugs were a magnificent source of protein, and is actually opening a business now. These are like, this is like a amazing engagement with the world. They've become world makers. So I started reflecting then on what are the barriers to students trying to quest, make connections, and take chances. And this, over the last couple years, trying to reflect on this question, I started going to lunch with students and having these really deep conversations with them. When you go to lunch with me, I just invite anybody who wants to go to lunch, and I spend every day at lunch with a student. And the rule of that lunch is that there's no small talk, that we're going to talk deep. And to summarize a vast array of conversations, I would say that there actually are really interesting questions coming out of these students that are not just about tests and grades and so on. And the big ones are things like, who am I? What am I going to do? Am I going to make it? As an example of this, I met a student who had just come in from California. She chose Kansas State from California because it was like a blank slate to her. It was a place where she could reinvent herself. When she was 8 years old, she remembers driving with her parents, and her 6-year-old brother was outdoing her in math. On that day, she decided she wasn't smart, and she kept that image of not being smart all the way through high school. It allowed her to be very popular, but by the time she got to college, she said, as we were sitting there at lunch, she said, "I've been faking it so long, I don't know who I am." And so she's wondering who she is. There's another student who her parents split up when she was young. Her mom started messing around a lot, and early in her high school career, her mom just vanished, and she was left alone at school, or left alone at home. The bills didn't get paid. She ended up homeless. And that day she goes to school, and she'd been acting out at school as you would imagine she would, and her English teacher pulls her outside, and she says, "What's going on? Why are you doing this?" And she just starts crying. She says, "I can't go on anymore." That English teacher took her home, and she's lived with that English teacher ever since. She graduated as valedictorian, and she's sitting in my anthropology class, and she's an accounting major. And she's an accounting major because it's safe, and she hates accounting. So she's wondering, what's she gonna do? And then I'll just give you one more example, like a perfect student. She's amazing. She's gonna be up for like Truman Scholars and everything else. Like she's gonna go for the top scholarships. And she hands me a note at the end of class, and it says, I know you think I'm amazing, I do all these great things, but I need you to know that I'm running from anxiety, depression, suicide. And the harder I run, the more I feel like I'm going back into those cycles. And she was especially worried about the people around her. She thought, everybody around me is having so much fun. Everybody around me is like having this great life, and I'm missing it. And you look then at the student profiles, and you look at all the airbrushing that happens, all the filtering that happens, not just of the colors, but also of reality itself. Like every moment's amazing. And these students have to live in this mediated environment. That's what it is to them. To us, it's like this information space that can be this great learning space, but to them, it's a social space. And it's highly filtered. And you might have read this really dramatic article about the suicide at Penn, in which it basically points out that we're constantly comparing our insides to their outsides. Students are always doing that because they only see this amazing airbrushed beauty of their peers and not what's going on inside. One of the students I was having lunch with said, "I feel like I always have to be happy. I have no place to express myself when things get hard because you can't say that stuff on Facebook." So students are shutting off their feelings. This is from Yik Yak. I think that I might have actually turned off all my feels off. I don't really feel much anymore. And just to point to something that's in the water, that's like, and by the water I mean like that's there. It's so immersive that nobody talks about it, and yet it's always there. Most of the sex happening on college campuses looks like this. And there's now emerging evidence that this type of sexual activity, which is rampant, is causing people to lose a sense of connection to one another and a sense of vibrancy to life. So as Thomas de Zingo-Tito points out, in the midst of a fabulous array of historically unprecedented and utterly mind-boggling stimuli, whatever. And so what I've become interested in are these little lines, not just like the passage from here to there, but the little lines, which I think of as learning worth crying about. These are the spaces where students break down and they go through a transition and they emerge as something different. And the only way to get there is like with this young girl who came into my office and said, "I've been faking it so long, I don't know who I am anymore." That was 2 years ago. That was Kinsey. And I think like the biggest issue for us is that we also use technologies that pigeonhole people, that make people, that in many ways make us not experience the full person. And one of those technologies, of course, is the grade. And so some people are very complacent and happy about these things, but other people are, of course, completely disenfranchised by these things. So I wanted to offer an alternative here in closing. And this is what changed me so much this semester. That is, I decided to not use any grades. So instead, I imagined my students at the bottom of this great mountain, And at the top of the mountain, I put something that's worth it. And we all agreed that it was worth it. It was something we all cared about, something we all wanted to achieve. And then I just kind of scaffolded it for them, made all these little spaces where they could land and say, okay, if we get this far, then we know we can get the next space, and so on. And you might say these are assignments in the final project, whatever you want to do. But the rule is that everybody gets up. And I made this rule so that other people would help each other as well. So when they didn't get all the way up, these students would get a grade that was simply not yet. And what was amazing was how quickly the other students started reaching out to help. And so we made it all to that first platform. And then they started working together and finding ways to pull each other up the mountain. And we started moving. But then things get hard. As any research project, things get messy and you just don't know what's going to happen next. And so we really struggled through the middle part. But that struggle was made easier by struggling together. And then we kind of hit our stride and we started racing to the finish line. And by the time we got there, not that we're even there yet, but we're nearly there, what we realized is that the final project is not really so final, that the real project all along has been us. And that's what's worth it. A lot of what inspired this was my son. This is my son learning how to go down steps. And you can see how he just does it with such joy. And, and then he faces problems. This is big brother coming in and knocks him around a little bit. But he gets right back up. Month after month. This is filmed over months, by the way. And he does it. So I want to end then with this guy. So I teach in this class, and I often would look out and I would see this guy, David. And David always looks like this, or he looks like this. And I was convinced that he hated me. And it was so psychologically challenging to teach to this. And this is what I would see. And so of course I had to invite him out to lunch. And I invite him out to lunch, and I find out he has a video game addiction. That's why he sleeps. But it's a little different than other people. He is also the president of the Kansas State University board games team. He's invented all sorts of games himself, including one which he started to describe to me, which was so complex and fantastic, which integrated multiple strands of mythology and just absolutely gorgeous mathematically. It was just beautiful. And I thought, oh my gosh, this kid is a genius, and he has a 2.5 GPA. And so I invited him onto my team, my class, which moves into Metal Arc, and we decided to try to create a type of video game that has never really been seen before. It's kind of a real-life video game where we actually take people's apartments in this retirement community, and we build them inside the game. And then we rebuild all of their precious objects and their memories, and then we record stories from them, and you can actually walk around this space and hear their stories. You can pick up objects and hear their stories. You can see videos and pictures from their life. And we even are now working on scripts where we've been analyzing the way they actually experience the world, and we're trying to build that into the playing mechanics so that you actually can try to experience what it is to live with Alzheimer's and try to recover your memories. David has thrown himself into this and become, in many ways, the superhero. And while the semester is over, the project's not done, and I just saw David post on his Facebook, we'll get to continue the project this summer. Yay. So I'll end with that. Thanks.
So I would pity anybody who has to go after Mike. So right now I'm feeling extremely sorry for myself. The other thing I should say is I spend most of my time holed up in a research laboratory. I'm a neuroscientist by training, getting into psychology and also education. But mostly I'm under fluorescent lighting in a windowless room with my other students. And once in a while, people let me out to speak to people like you. So I'm very, very grateful and happy to be here today. And thank you for the warm welcome. Okay, so today I'll talk to you a little bit about the science of learning, which is an area that's it's multidisciplinary. It's just starting to come to the fore. And it really is based on the blending of multiple different arenas. And what I'll tell you today is some of the findings from this that I think most of them will simply reinforce what you've already intuited about your practice of teaching. But at least now you'll have some concrete evidence that you can use to support your ideas. Okay, well, this is not working for me, so I'm just going to stand here, unfortunately. Oh, no, it is. Okay. So I always start with the brain, but we're going to talk mostly about behavioral data today. There are a number of different brain systems. One of them, various ones that focus on attention or memory or motivation, all of which are absolutely essential for learning. Oh dear, I'm just going to stand here. And so one of these is the prefrontal cortex, which is basically a third of the human brain here. And I'll be talking a lot more about this region in the afternoon. And prefrontal is really important for focusing your attention, ignoring distractors, organizing information, integrating various sources of information, for example, across classes, planning, decision-making, reasoning, all of this, essentially what makes us human. Then we have the hippocampus, this structure deep in the brain that's shown in green, that's essential for forming new memories and then retrieving them later. And also we have the basal ganglia, also deep in the brain, that's essential for motivation and for reinforcement of learning. And so every factor, essentially anything about our body that influences attention, memory, motivation, anything inside us or outside in the classroom, in the way that the teacher interacts with you, is going to be having its effects through these brain systems. Let's talk first about attention, which relies on prefrontal cortex. What would you think is the biggest impediment to attention in our college classes today? This is something Mike already alluded to. Yeah, exactly. So multitasking, this is from college students at public universities in the Northeast, so not Boston College. And this is the percentage of students who self-report that they're texting sometimes or somewhat or very frequently. This is 70% of the students texting, like 25% doing Facebook, email, search, instant messaging, or even talking, talking to one another, since we would notice if they were talking on the phone. Okay, so this is a lot of students doing a lot of other things other than attending to us, which is obviously demoralizing. And these ones are negatively correlated with their GPA, even after you account for their high school grades, their SAT scores, etc. Which is not to say that the rest of this is all okay, obviously. Another thing I want to point out is these are students rating, reflecting on the factors that interfere with their own ability to learn in class. And this one surprises me a lot. The highest factor is other students' computer use. So if you're trying to learn and the person next to you is shopping for shoes online, that's obviously going to impact you, in fact, just as much as your own computer use. To take this a step further, let's look at what actually is happening, because a lot of students will tell me, oh, but I use my laptop to take notes. And I always show these slides at the beginning of every semester. And so I want to show you some of these data from a beautiful study at Princeton recently. What they did was they assigned college students randomly to classrooms that were equipped either with laptops or with notebooks and pens, old school. Everybody listened to the same lectures that were videotaped, and they were instructed to use their usual note-taking strategy, either on the laptop or with their old school notebook. 30 minutes later, they were tested on factual recall of the material as well as conceptual understanding. So guess which students took more notes and wrote down more of the lecture verbatim? Okay. When tested on facts, whom do you think did better? Okay. When tested on ideas, whom do you think did better? Okay, so the answers are, obviously the laptops, they took down more notes. They can do it more quickly. We can all type faster than we can write these days. When tested on facts, they were tied. And when tested on ideas, the notebook won out. Why do you think that is? you have to process the information. You can't write as quickly as you can type, and so you have to, kind of get it down to the gist and then write that down. So you have to process, you have to actively engage with the material. Okay, so then they took it a step further and they did different students, same idea, randomly assigned to the 2 classrooms. And now, instead of testing the understanding of the material 30 minutes after, this was actually when it came time to study for the exam in the course. Whom do you think benefited more? The ones who had the detailed notes that had been typewritten, or the ones with the messy, shorter handwritten notes when tested on facts and when tested on ideas? Handwritten, both ways. I show this every semester, and at this point, I don't even have to ask the students to put away their laptops. They just do it naturally. It's just kind of an understood thing in the class at that point. So then they said, okay, so we know that with laptops, people just kind of tend to be stenographers. They tend to write everything down. But then what they said was, okay, try not to do that. Try to do what you would do if you were taking notes by hand. Try to just get the gist. And the students were unable to do that. They just reverted to typing like that. So another important aspect of attention, even when you're focused on the class and you're not doing anything else, is that it wanes extremely rapidly. And our classes that are 50 minutes or even an hour and a half, I've even had some that were 3 hours long, God forbid, are just not designed for this kind of thing. Not only this kind of situation here where I'm giving a PowerPoint and you're passively listening, but just essentially, attention is going to wane rapidly. This, I think, is kind of a theoretical plot, but it's based on data of just subjective reports of students of their own attention. It starts out really high. You have like a good 10 minutes with the students before it absolutely plummets. And then here, I don't know, I think they're thinking about lunch or next class or whatever it is. But and so what can we do to combat this extremely important problem, right? I mean, we prepare 50 minutes of content, and then they're checking out after 10, 15 minutes. So we obviously have to engage in change. Anything that's novel is gonna bring the attention right back, instantaneously, right? If I were to stand up on this desk, I'd get you all focusing again. And so really roughly every 10, 15 minutes or so, we should be trying to build into our lectures some sort of a thought question, group activity, some sort of a demo, even a joke, these sorts of things, maybe a photo, an image that takes them out of this realm and pushes them into a new one. And so the idea, the hope, is that you can get people's attention back periodically every 10 to 15 minutes. Okay? Still not perfect, but better than not. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about these various factors. I've talked a bit about attention. The next one is memory. Obviously, memory and learning are essentially one and the same. Here's some more really depressing data that we've had basically since the 1880s. This is how quickly people forget. Okay, this is like tightly controlled experimental stuff where you're just learning very, very simple stuff, okay? But the assumption is that at time 1, you understood everything, you remember everything, and even if that's true, which is never true, there's just this incredibly rapid drop-off. At 2 days later, you're retaining 30% of what you learned, 25%, 6 days later, and then, a month later, you're down to, 10, 15% of the material. So what are we doing in our classes, and how can we avoid this? Well, one way is by having students space their learning such that they engage with the material regularly. And so there's lots of good evidence that, if there's restudying of the material, you can actually retain the material over time. Okay, so this is pretty good. And then the question is, what kind of spacing is important for students to re-engage with the material? Well, not mass learning, which is you take in a whole semester or half a semester, and then you study the night before the exam, and then you dump it out. That's associated with incredible forgetting, but rather re-engaging very regularly. Not every single day, but at a point when forgetting has started to happen so that it is cognitively engaging, it's difficult to re-engage with the material. But not at a point where you've completely forgotten all the material and you have to start over from square one. So, depending on the subject matter, this is going to vary quite a bit. All right. And maybe we can talk more about how you structure your classes in such a way to encourage students to engage regularly with the material. For example, having a quiz on the very next session of the class after some new material has been learned. Okay, so this issue of testing that I just brought up is actually really, really important. Testing is not just a form of assessment, it's actually a way to enhance learning. So this is a study at Washington University where students got these prose passages that they had to read, and then they had to free recall them, just everything that they remembered from these passages. And then they had a series of study sessions of 5 minutes or test sessions of 5 minutes each. And the question was, what is more helpful to you, just rereading the passage or testing yourself? Okay? And so students were asked to rate their interest in the topic, and it turns out that if you're testing yourself along the way, that you find it more interesting. Whatever you're reading is more interesting than if you're studying it over and over. But interestingly, if you're asked about your confidence and your ability to remember, the people who are restudying and restudying are actually more confident that they're going to learn more. And this is probably what drives students to engage so passively in their material when they're studying for an exam, that they think, oh, this is a good way to do it. Just reread the textbook over and over, and eventually I'll get this. But then when we look at the actual data of how they perform, what we have here is different conditions. So this is where students study the material in these 5-minute increments, study, 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 study. This is where they got to test themselves. And this is where they tested themselves repeatedly after the first study session. And this is the amount of forgetting over 1 week, so higher is worse. And you can see that they did best when they were repeatedly testing themselves. Okay. Another topic that Mike touched on was this idea of deep learning as opposed to surface learning. So surface learning, just kind of memorizing mindlessly in an isolated way, not making connections with each other, and with no sort of sense of what the greater purpose is. That's associated with very poor long-term retention, whereas actively engaging in the material, sort of rotating new ideas around, trying to integrate them is obviously really, really important and leads to higher confidence in your memory. If you want to learn more about these ideas about how to promote memory, this is a fantastic book from those folks at Washington University who did this research, Make It Stick. Okay, so next I want to touch on, I mean, this is really a broad overview here. We could get much more deep into any of these topics, but the next thing I want to do is touch on the issue of motivation, which is absolutely essential, and Mike showed us exactly how to motivate his students one by one. Let's go into the brain for just a moment here. We have these cells deep in the brain that produce a neurochemical called dopamine that's absolutely essential for motivation. And the way that dopamine works is it's released into the brain, and it modulates activity of the whole brain, essentially, whenever something novel happens or whenever you receive an unexpected reward. And then dopamine starts to fire, essentially, whenever you're expecting a future reward, and it engages you, it mobilizes you to try to seek out that reward. It makes you very goal-directed. So anticipating a future reward is really helpful. And when dopamine is released throughout the brain, the first thing that it does is it boosts working memory. Working memory, the ability to keep information in mind so that you can manipulate it, reorganize it, use it. So it boosts performance over the short term. The other thing that dopamine does is it reinforces learning. It lays down it helps to lay down the networks, essentially, that form new memories. And so what it does is it increases the chances that you're going to be able to, again, do the thing that was previously rewarded. Okay, I hope you're with me so far. That's sort of, we're going to come back out to the behavior in just a moment. But the really important thing about the dopamine system is that it gets bored extremely quickly, okay? If you get the same reward over and over and over again, it loses its oomph. And then you just don't have any more motivation to engage with the material. So let's think for a moment about students' motivations, right? Again, something that Mike touched on. The first is extrinsic motivation, which is the entire way that courses are structured around grades. And so students are either motivated to achieve or get the best grade in the class, or they're motivated deeply by a fear of failure, just anxiety around being the worst in the class. Now, intrinsic motivation, this is again this sense of wonder that we talked about, the sense of curiosity and play. It's when you enjoy the activity for its own sake. So I want to sit in, I want to take Mike's classes myself. I mean, they sound super exciting. When you're motivated by interest and curiosity, and how do you harness this? And this is something I want to talk about later. How do we restructure our classes so that students are not so focused on grades? I mean, it's not always easy to say, okay, nobody's going to get a grade at all in this class. So I want to talk more about how we do this later on. And the other really kind of depressing thing is that if you get rewarded for something that you actually naturally enjoy, your interest in that starts to wane. There's excellent research from Stanford by a woman named Carol Dweck, who's shown that with children, if you reward them with little toys or something like that for making drawings, that they naturally would have done anyway, at a certain point they won't even draw anymore on their own unless they're going to get a reward. Whether this translates up to college classes is unclear, but I think it's really important to keep in mind. Okay, so when students are intrinsically motivated, they obviously enjoy the process more, that's by definition. They show longer-term retention. This is research out of Stanford. They apply their knowledge more often, they engage in deep learning. They demonstrate higher academic achievement, and they perceive themselves as more competent. So this is what we should be all striving towards. And there are ways to assess students' goal orientation. There are questionnaires out there that you can use that you could use to help students reflect on why they're taking a class. This is a set of items that allow you to see whether a student has a mastery goal. I like classwork that I'll learn from, even if I'll make lots of mistakes. The reason I do it is because I want to learn new things. I like classwork best when it really makes me think, etc. And there are other questions that are geared towards seeing whether they're motivated by performance goals, either achieving or not failing, essentially. And there are other scales that you can use to assess teachers and how teachers inspire or fail to inspire these mastery goals. And so I'll provide all my slides, and you can get this link, and start to evaluate. They even have ones for entire institutions. So just to think about how your school is doing as a whole. Okay. One thing that Mike touched on here is the importance of playful learning. And the reason that playful learning is so important is that the ingredients of play are precisely those that we know promote learning. And play is often something that's relegated to preschool, kindergarten classes, and then later on we end up with these lectures that are extremely unplayful, right? So why is play important? Well, first of all, it's intrinsically motivating, as we talked about. Secondly, it provides an opportunity for novel experiences. And as I just mentioned, dopamine fires when something is new. It allows us to engage actively, which is obviously important, and it allows us to learn from others. We know that students learn very well from their peers, at least as well as from teachers, if not more so. And while you're at it, you could be strengthening social bonds, which is important. Now, engaging these kind of joyful activities is going to reduce stress levels. And I could have had a section on this, but it's very clear now that chronic stress of the kind that students have year in, year out, taking exam after exam, actually starts to shrivel a part of the brain that's really important for memory. The hippocampus. Cells actually die in the hippocampus when you're exposed to chronic levels of stress. A little bit of stress in a transient way is actually good. It enhances performance, but not this kind of slow trickle over time. A lot of great research on that from Robert Sapolsky at Stanford. Okay. So here are some more ideas for classroom activities that can make us more playful. So some things we can do, we can prepare hands-on activities. Sometimes these are a waste of time, and students have no idea what the demonstration showed or why. But if you can lay down some of the content first, and then give a demonstration, and then link it back to the theory, then it can be extremely powerful. Enthusiasm is really, really important. Making clear why the material is going to be useful in real life rather than just for getting a good grade. Making connections to topics that interest students, trying to make it less dry, more applicable. Analogies are a fantastic way to do this. You don't want to overemphasize analogies. I study analogical reasoning, and I'll be talking about reasoning in the afternoon. And so I try to come up with an analogy for everything, and I start to mix my metaphors because I've got so many different analogies in the lecture, which is not good. But one well-chosen analogy can really just bring all the material home. Okay, and so again, how do we de-emphasize grades? And my way of doing this is to explain to them that intrinsic motivation is actually going to get them much farther and lead to higher achievement in the course in the long run. Okay, the last thing that I want to touch on with respect to motivation is this issue of mindsets. We all have different beliefs about intelligence. Some of us think that intelligence is a static trait. It's genetically mediated, and you just, the luck of the draw, the lottery either leads you to be actually smart or not smart. And as a teacher, having this idea about your students is extremely pernicious and counterproductive, right? And then other people have a growth mindset, which is that intelligence is like any other skill. It's something that's developed through practice. And I'll be showing some data this afternoon that shows just how the brain is changed by the experience of reasoning. And so this fixed mindset is actually very common in the United States, much less so in Asia, where there's much more of an emphasis on practice makes perfect. And the idea is essentially that if you fail a test or you don't understand a concept, it's not that you're stupid, it's that you just haven't worked hard enough yet. Not yet, which is, again, this concept that Mike brought up. The really bad thing about a fixed mindset is that if you think that every assessment is an assessment that reflects on who you are as a person, how good of a person you are, then it's extremely nerve-wracking to engage in assessments, and it's not acceptable to fail. And what does this lead students to do when there's no possibility for failure? It leads them to not want to take any kind of risks, not take a class that might be too challenging, not try to go beyond the material, stay focused on the material that's going to be tested, et cetera. So there's actually good evidence now that there are benefits to be reaped by having a growth mindset. First of all, it significantly raises students' grades and their achievement test scores. Secondly, it particularly helps underrepresented minorities. It helps them to stay engaged and achieve well, even in the face of these rampant stereotypes against them. And it creates a love of learning and a resilience that's essential for great accomplishment. There's another book, so I highly recommend that book, Mindset by Carol Dweck. Really, really a worthwhile read. But there's another book that's really great, also by a cognitive scientist named Dan Willingham, Why Don't Students Like School? And he's got a number of recommendations that are based on this work on mindsets. The first one is to praise effort, not ability. If you keep telling someone, oh, you're really gifted, you're really smart, that leads them to reinforce their idea of themselves as a fixed person with fixed attributes. If you praise effort, that leads them to want to try harder. Showing students that you have confidence in them. Essentially, this comes back to this idea that you have to get rid of the notion that you have some students who are smart and some students who aren't. You need to start with yourselves to reconceptualize this idea of brain systems that are fully worked up, that are functioning optimally, versus ones that still need exercise. Okay. It's important to treat failure as a natural part of learning. How do we promote that? How do we make that possible? And students don't often have good study skills, and we take for granted that they know how to engage with the material, but as I said, most students will just reread the textbook without engaging in it, without testing themselves regularly, actively. Okay, so the last thing that I want to touch on before I get to the final topic of brain health is the importance of teaching assistants, and I know that you have them here at Boston College. They're perceived as less intimidating than faculty, more approachable, more understanding. Why is this helpful? Well, as I just mentioned, anxiety really impedes learning, and rapport with an instructor boosts motivation. Teaching assistants are also perceived as more enthusiastic than faculty. They, you know, when you've been teaching the same class over and over again, it's hard to stay enthusiastic. And this is really important. Teaching assistant enthusiasm increases the likelihood of retention in the sciences, you know, just as one example. They're also seen as more flexible, more informal than faculty, which means that they're in a position to create an atmosphere that's more conducive to playful learning and inquiry, breaking out into smaller groups. All of this is really important. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about is the importance of other factors about brain health that influence brain health. And there are two in particular. The first one is sleep. Mike showed us that student who was sleeping. This is unfortunately really common, so I want to read you this quote. Campus life is like a giant laboratory experiment designed for maximal sleep deprivation. Irregular schedules, newfound freedom, endless social interaction, loud and crowded housing, late-night exercise, and food washed down with booze, coffee, and energy drinks. Okay, this is what we're fighting against. This is, I think, the biggest impediment to learning, aside from multitasking. And I've been heavily influenced by two of my colleagues at Berkeley, Matt Walker and Alison Harvey, who study the effects of sleep deprivation on memory, mood, and mental health issues. Okay? So these are some data from Matt Walker's lab. This is after a night of sleep deprivation in Tolman Hall in our psychology department in the basement. They have students either sleep or spend the whole night up playing games, eating snacks. And then they study how much they can learn the next day. And there's a 40% reduction in how much they can learn after a night of sleep deprivation. And moreover, when you zoom into that region of the brain that's important for memory consolidation and retrieval, the hippocampus, what you see is a massive reduction in the ability to engage this region when you're encoding new material. So these are students, they're lying in the MRI scanner. We're getting measures of their blood flow to this region of the brain that's so important for memory, and they're encoding new information, and you know their brain is checked out. It's offline. These also are data that I show to students, although I haven't done anything like see whether these kinds of data help them to get on a more regular sleep schedule. But Matt Walker has done this. He teaches a whole semester about sleep and the brain, and by the end he finds that students are sleeping on average an hour more than beforehand. So really impressive stuff. Okay, and the last thing is cardiovascular exercise. It's very easy as a student to just focus entirely on your schoolwork and not appreciate just how important cardiovascular exercise is going to be to help you learn. So what are the ways in which it does that? Many ways, in fact. It leads to increased blood flow to the brain, which brings oxygen, glucose, and much needed nutrients to the brain cells. It actually stimulates the growth of new cells in the hippocampus. Remember, stress reduces the number of cells. It kills brain cells. And cardiovascular exercise is the exact opposite. The hippocampus is the only part of the brain where new cells are actually born. New neurons are born throughout life. And they're important for learning new information. And exercise helps with this. The other thing that it does is not only increase the pool of neurons, but it increases connections between neurons. Really important. And over time, it improves resilience to stress. So when you first start exercising, you get a release of cortisol, that's the stress hormone. But over time, you get a smaller release of cortisol every time you experience a stressor, and that carries over into the anxiety that you feel in class, etc. So it helps you to regulate your stress hormone levels. It has short-term boosts for mood, stress, concentration, and memory that last for several hours after a period of exercise. And then the long-term benefits, the structural changes in the brain, they start to emerge in as little as 6 months of regular exercise. So this is another area that I think is really important to emphasize to students. With that, I want to end and take some comments.
I thought I'd ask first for Mike to respond to Sylvia with some questions and perhaps Sylvia to respond, but then pretty soon we're going to open it up to folks here. Thanks.
Right. It was like every time I came up with a question, you would answer it the next slide. So
The same thing happened for me.
A couple of comments. One was you mentioned the importance of TAs. We actually use undergraduate TAs because we don't have a graduate program. And it's been amazing. A lot of those characteristics that you noted are actually magnified in some ways by an undergraduate TA, as long as they're good and you know, you have to like, we do like weekly training sessions and that kind of thing. But we did a survey in our program of why students became majors, why they became anthropology majors. And we expected, one of the questions was there a particular professor or anybody who inspired you? And we thought it would be like a race to see which professor was the most inspiring. The TAs actually won. They, and the winner actually was Kenzie, who you already saw. She's the reason why we have more majors now. So that was interesting. Then, especially down the stretch, you started to anticipate my questions. I had recently seen a study about neurogenesis in rats, and with exercise, and I didn't know if that also related to humans, and apparently
Yes.
it does. Okay,
Yeah.
great. And then the other one I wondered was the effect of social isolation or strong social ties. Like in our world, you know, we talk about social capital. Does that correlate with?
Yes. So social isolation in animal research is shown to be to negatively affect the memory system, hippocampus, as well as the prefrontal system, important for learning, planning, all of it. Yeah, and I mean, I think that one of the most important ways in which social bonding helps is by reducing stress, improving resilience, but also, yeah, the novel experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I was thinking about how you get students to focus away from grades.
Yeah.
And so the way that I've done it is just simply to say, come talk to me about ideas.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear about grades. I do not want to hear anything about that. You've got the syllabus, it tells you about the grade structure.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to think about how to allow them to fail along the way and allow them to show progress. And I don't know the best way to do that. And
Yeah.
I wonder.
Right. So the answer is different depending on the size of class. Does anybody teach? I teach some small classes where this is really easy. So like with 12 students and under, does anybody have that situation? A few, okay. And then 35 or so is maybe more common. And the approach is different in each one. With the 12 student class, we have this really big project in mind, and this year we're building that video game that I showed. And we look at a lot of final products that we think are inspiring. So this year, if you're familiar with new games like Gone Home, some maybe not. So there's some new types of games out there. We basically played those games, and then we sort of cataloged the good features of those games, and that became our rubric. And then we just go out week after week and try to get better at doing the things that need to get done to make that game. And week after week, most of class is in a way spent, you might call it assessment, but really it's just feedback, giving each other feedback. And the whole spirit of the thing is like, we're gonna get here. We're gonna go to this space. That growth mindset is just built right into it. There's never a sense of grades, because I've never said anything about grades. I don't even mention it. It's just not even present. I will say, I've been carrying this around. These are actually my grades to the students. It's 12 pages, single-spaced, of evaluation of them. I'll read just a bit of David's here maybe for you, just to give you a sense of what this looks like. This is just a small part of David's. It has been absolutely delightful and inspiring to watch you dig deep and work with such dedication on developing the skills to create games. And by the way, praising effort, not, this is all like strategic in many ways. If you asked me to list your virtues 6 months ago, dedication would not have been one of them. The lunch we shared last year is something I'll always remember and cherish. Prior to that lunch, my impression of you is that you were very smart and that you thought you were too good for my classes. I went into that lunch thinking that you would probably convince me of this, and that I would need to rethink how I teach. Instead, I discovered passions within you I didn't know existed. I found somebody who could, would, and has thrown themselves into meaningful creative projects that unfortunately are not especially valued by school and might be labeled as nerdy or geeky by society at large. I found someone who has been mishandled, mistreated, and underappreciated by an education system focused on frustratingly narrow pursuits. In other words, I found a hero ready for adventure. a hero pushed to the margins of society, who by virtue of having been pushed there sees things others cannot see. If he finds the strength to look honestly at himself and the world, he will find the insight to heal himself and others and set forth into the world to share a new message of hope and redemption. So it's kind of put into his language, he loves heroes. And so all of these are kind of like that. And I read these on the last day of class and mostly cried through the whole thing. And that's what grading looks like. What was beautiful about that was that the whole semester I found myself, while of course we're evaluating the work that students are doing week by week, as people I found myself cherishing their strengths and often finding that their weaknesses were transformed into strengths in certain situations. Like, you know, we're all different, and you start to see how these differences matter. So that was really great. In a larger class, I should address that. What I tried this semester, and I'm not yet sure how well it worked. I'm still waiting to hear back from students and so on, but I did the not yet grading. It was a lot of work. I had 6 big assignments, and basically students would turn them in, and they would just get a not yet if they didn't, get there. And it was either not yet or you got it. And so I had to regrade a lot of things, which is a lot of time, and maybe too much time. Like I have to reassess it just for that purpose alone. But certainly by the end of the semester, I was very pleased with how far the students had come. And instead of marking a bunch of C's and D's in the grade book, which were disappointments, and instead I gave a lot of A's, but they worked really hard for those. And so that was really rewarding in that sense.
That's my approach as well, of having this mastery goal that I don't care if I give, the majority of students an A at the end, Unfortunately, my university says I have to have a normal grade distribution, and so they're on my case about this, but I don't plan to budge.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah. Other questions in the audience?
Hi, thanks so much for both your presentations. I feel like, so I teach the honors chemistry labs here at BC, and I'm in a unique position of I have these students for 3 semesters consecutively. I'm with them. I do have an outstanding teaching assistant, but I'm on board with everything you've said. But the students I have come in, they're very motivated. They've already had chemistry. And they and their families and their grandparents are looking for medical school. And you can't change, we even have presentations on our campus that say, look, it's a 3.64 average. And all my students, I'm spending, everything you've said is right on board with, I don't talk about grades, I'm with them. They very much appreciate what I'm trying to do, but that looming, hanging over their head dark cloud if I don't cut it. I have scholars who are thinking, should I change my major because I got a B+? When is a B+ a bad grade? And let's not talk about grades, but when you are faced with trying to teach in a way that is conducive to learning and really focusing on the individual's growth, how do we face this reality of here's what you want to do, but there's a gate?
Yeah.
Can you both comment on that?
Yeah,
Thanks.
So the way that I do it is I say, I'm going to expect a lot of you this semester. We are going to learn a lot of material. But if you do it, you will get an A. Most of you are going to get an A if you stick with this. And so then it's off the table.
Yeah, I mean, so we're all within that structure, and then we bend it where we can, and so on. And one thing that I don't really buy into is that it takes everybody 17 weeks to get an A. And so I give a lot of, like those medical students come in and they're griping about the B, I just say, okay, incomplete, and here's what you need to do to get up to an A by next semester. So.
In the back. You at the very back.
And I think a lot of us can appreciate sort of the movement towards wonder. but do you go and directly tell your students that you want them to get to wonder, or do you just guide them there?
I've done both, and depends on, I think it's very subtle, like how you frame it, because talking about learning to students can be very, very useful, but it can also feel like a distraction. It can also feel like you're putting them down. Like if you say, look, you guys are all like answer people, and you should be at wonder. Like it can that can feel bad. So I've done it both ways, and I've settled now on I don't show them the diagram anymore, unless sometimes like in a conversation like at lunch or in my office, I'll show it to them like if it comes up in the right way. But I do show them, I show this video, and it's a 2-minute video of these people playing in the snow in Wellington, New Zealand. And I show that, and it's just kind of an inspirational piece in which I cover the big aspects of wonder. I say a lot of the same things that those studies say about what that state is like. And I just try to like put that out there as something that's a worthy goal, a worthy way to like be in the world.
What do you think about effort-based grading? The idea being, for example, students get 100% for decent effort, 50% for indecent effort, and 0% for no effort, and you just grade all the assignments like that. And then you just have the responsibility of making sure that the assignments are good, so if they do their effort, then they should learn something.
What do you think?
That's what I'm striving for. Haven't gotten there yet.
I think it's so, I mean, you're raising such an interesting issue, and for me, like I've wrestled with that a lot, and I guess like what I really liked about this semester, in which I didn't have any grades to worry about, like there was never 100 or 50 or any sort of number to put on anything. I guess there's two answers to that. One is like that was refreshing to not have to worry about the numbers. But on the other hand, I know a lot of students worked a lot harder than others to get the same grade, right? To get past the not yet. So I don't know. There's no easy answer to that. In the course of a curriculum, like many of you guys might know, like that's where I'm at. I teach at the beginning of our anthropology curriculum. Regardless of effort, I have a responsibility to get them to a certain place so they can go on to the next class and be successful. So that's where the effort thing is maybe not everything we need. So it's tricky.
Thank you. I teach at the Department of Economics, and a lot of people think economics is not that interesting, even boring. I beg to disagree. And I'm also a product of Boston College. I got my PhD here, so I have the honor to teach here. So I really enjoyed my education here as a student, and a lot of things that both of you mentioned applied to me as a student. And once I crossed the line, I was wondering if I was going to enjoy being on the other side as a teacher as much as I enjoyed learning. And quickly for myself, I discovered that actually the line is pretty blurred. I find myself constantly learning, so everything that you described actually applies to me, and I've been teaching 20 years. I constantly learn, and I believe that the wonder, the motivation are contagious. If I'm not really enthusiastic, and if I don't see the wonder, it's very difficult for me to communicate that with the class. So I'm wondering, how much does it apply to you? How much of your learning in excellence is the source of your teaching in excellence?
No, you go.
So for me, it's it's like all of it. Most of the things that I teach, especially in my big lecture class, I learned yesterday. You know, like I learned like the day before, because that's what I'm excited about. And I think being excited about it makes all the difference. And I analyze like how I learn And when I'm sort of in a peak learning mode, I like try to figure out like, why am I learning so well right now? And when I'm not learning so well, I try to analyze like, what's keeping me from learning right now? And I think those things are really a nice gateway to understanding how other people learn as well, like in a very deep sense, especially within your discipline, because each discipline has its own sort of things it has to wrestle with. And if you're not wrestling with them, then you're not going to be a very good teacher of those things.
I never teach the same class the same way twice. I would get too bored with that. And so I'm constantly updating with the new material, so constantly learning, trying to find a way to make the material more relevant to real world. So I teach a course on the developing brain, and a whole third of the course is devoted to why knowing about the development of the brain is important for law, education, public health, medicine. And so I'm constantly having to go way outside my area of expertise. Yeah, and I'm also constantly trying to take what I'm learning about the science of learning to try to push people towards this mastery, motivation, et cetera.
I'm very interested in your talking about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. I think all of us here understand, the data are very clear, how much better it is for students to be intrinsically motivated. My question is, how really do we do that? And in fact, is it possible? First of all, is there something fundamentally inconsistent with saying you're going to teach someone to be intrinsically motivated? Secondly, obviously you can remove extrinsic rewards, but I guess my real question is this. How much can you do in a classroom? How much is the sensitivity to extrinsic versus intrinsic rewards a trait that students bring after a lifetime of growth into the classroom that is pretty much immune to it change during the course of 3 months? And what can you do to do that?
That's the question, right? Yeah, I mean, just looking at everything that Mike's talked about his own teaching practice, it's phenomenal. It's hard for me to see exactly how I'm going to translate it to my large classes. I'm going to be teaching 150 students, this next semester, and I don't exactly know how I'm going to instill curiosity and wonder in each of them. I think for me, it's about making sure that they all find a final project that they are really lit up about, and finding ways for them to integrate the material over the course of the semester in the service of their final project that's very much individuated.
And for me, I think you're exactly right, and you nailed the paradox right at the beginning, saying that how do you teach this, motivation. So really, I mean, I think one of the things that happens when you just simply mention intrinsic versus extrinsic is you're putting it out on students. Once they see the data, then they can take that and they start working on it themselves. You can magnify that by having them journal on that topic in particular, for example. I have my students keep a journal, and I have them turn it in now and then just so I can see what's happening. And I took that idea from Paul Baker taught this class, Integration of Abilities, which is fantastic. It's profiled in the beginning of What the Best College Students Do by Ken Bain, if you've seen that book. And basically, he has students do really bizarre things. Like, for example, they go out and they meet somebody and they get to know them really well, and then they have to come back to class and they have to clap the rhythm of that person. Like people have a rhythm, It's totally bizarre, right? And so these students come in and they have to do this awkward clap. But then he has them journal about what was the creative process that led you to come up with that clap. And they have to think about how they think. And then he says, look, nobody in the world has ever thought the same way that you think. Nobody has the same experiences as you. Where does that come from? And it creates this reflective practice. And I think it's that reflective practice that's ultimately going to lead to that sense of passion and sort of joy in learning, intrinsic motivation, and so on.
Thank you both for terrific talks. I do research on motivation, and I totally buy into the idea of having a kind of growth mindset and having mastery goals. But the research is very mixed on this, and it does suggest that in some cases performance goals actually do lead to better outcomes than mastery goals or certain kinds of performance goals per se.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, how do you think about this? What do you think?
Yeah.
Is there a way to balance?
If you have a lot of material to memorize that's just necessary, for example, in a chemistry class, then sometimes you have to give an extrinsic reward, you know, a contest or some sort of thing. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. But for more higher level thinking, it's really, really critical to have the intrinsic motivation. I don't know if that squares with your understanding of the literature, but.
And I've also been interested in that lately, and I guess in practice, like I see the two merging together so tightly that it's hard to pull them apart. You know, like when I'm actually teaching, I haven't set up a controlled experiment in which there's only extrinsic or only intrinsic. It's just a mix. And I mean, one of the things that inspires me is actually my colleague at Kansas State who teaches completely different from me, like the opposite. And he could come in here and get you guys all excited about how you should teach in this completely opposite way of what I just said, because he's amazing at what he does. Like, it suits him and his personality, and his style is to like have these extraordinary high standards, and you either get there or you don't, and he'll fail you if you fail. And what happens is that students, because it's such a clear structure, most of them rise to the occasion. Most of them have a transformative experience and really feel like they've dramatically changed just by they're put into the fire, so to speak, you know. And there's something to be said for that.
I think it is true that there's a balance of the two, and we are in a structure that has grades at the end of the course, and so there is an extrinsic piece built in. I guess I just wanted to emphasize how necessary the intrinsic piece is as well, but point very well taken.
Can I introduce a question from the Twitter back channel? It's similar to the question about motivation, but it's framing it in slightly different language. This person writes, I want to learn about specific tips, I should emphasize, specific tips, to shift teaching and learning from grades to wonder, that is teaching and learning that inspires wonder, deep engagement, risk-taking. That is, what are strategies that can push students in that direction?
So for me, I mean, come to my workshop later. But specific tips are, I mean, I kind of think of them in terms of the three things I laid out, the quest and connection and vulnerability, or taking chances. So in terms of quest, you know, really trying to find a project that's meaningful, and you can have certain tests for whether or not it's meaningful. If students will work on it outside of class or when it's not even for a grade, then you know it's meaningful. If it should be real, a project that you already know how it should turn out, or a problem that you know the answer to is not a real problem. So having that sense of authentic engagement is important. And then a sense of connection is important. So and you can there's lots of different ways to build connection. You know, I'm not a big fan of icebreakers, but I am a fan of bringing people together. So there's a lot of creative ways to do things that bring people together. And they can feel icebreaker-like, but they can also feel like they're full of purpose. And so think about what those things might be. And then you do have to create a space where they can fail. Even if you're still going to have grades, you can still have iterations, you can have feedback, you can have all kinds of ways that people can try and know that you're going to be supportive of them when they fail.
I think also something you said earlier is about your role as a professor is to inspire and just lay out these paradoxes and, you know, these interesting questions, much more so than about, you know, conveying information that is just being poured passively into their heads. If you can inspire them to think and ask questions and seek out the answers, then you've done your job.
Okay. I teach a intro programming course. And what's been interesting to me to observe, and this gets back to the teaching people how to learn or study skills, is that the course starts off very gently. It's aimed at non-techies. And at first, just learning the mechanics and having assignments, it's really clear what you need to do. What I said in class or what the book says tells you how to do it. And then you get to those first assignments where it's like, okay, you have the Lego bricks, you know how to snap them together, but there's no step-by-step instructions, and here's a picture of what you're supposed to create. And what I notice is that some people, for whatever reason, sometimes it's because they're just really into it or that's how their mind works. That idea that they have to do something they've never seen before with tools they have works. And others hit a wall. And I've been trying to figure out how to help those others get past that wall where they feel like it's something they can figure out the new thing. So I tried things like, having decks of cards and handing them out to groups and giving them a challenge around the cards. And what I discovered was a group with someone who gets it, they would help the others and they'd have this great experience. And then another group would assure me that they were making progress and then would quietly not get there. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about how you help people get past that to where they're teaching themselves how to solve problems they've never solved before.
That's something that I'm going to try to talk about this afternoon in the session on reasoning. I don't know that we'll get all the way there, but hopefully with some feedback, some discussion. But yeah, I don't have a ready answer.
I was hoping you did.
Yeah. Remember, I spend most of my time in the lab.
Yeah,
so.
but I think there's really, I mean, this gets at a question that I have that's really for you as well, and that is like, like in that situation, is it possible that there's nothing that he can do at that moment, and that person just has to have developed in some way, or needs, like maybe there's some actual like growth that hasn't happened yet that's blocking it?
I think that's right, and it's a matter of practicing, practicing integrating information and just breaking down the barriers, because if people feel anxiety around the uncertainty, about the unknown of having to find their own way to integrate the material, maybe this first step is to instill in them this sense that, this is something they got to practice. They have critical thinking skills that they need to work on. And then finding activities and finding other students who can help them get past that is probably the best way.
And then again, I know this is a hard question, but as these students who are just not there yet are struggling, and it's so definitive because it's like in a programming situation where I'm thinking of like, I mess around on that web page that has like Eulers. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but it's like a series of programming challenges, and they sort of level up. And I've been trying to teach myself programming and leveling up as I go. And it's so definitive when you don't get it, right? So it's not like, but you have this great skill. It's like, no, I just can't do this. Then there's this problem of like, how do you maintain that growth mindset in that situation where it seems so hopeless?
Yeah, just this idea that you're not there yet. You're really going to have to work on this because you're uncomfortable with uncertainty right now. You did fine when it was a matter of memorizing all this stuff, but now you got to find a way to get beyond that.
Yeah.
So I'm really intrigued with your lunchtime discussions, and I just wonder how you get the conversations to get to those deep levels.
It's surprisingly easy. I'm not sure why. It could be because when I teach, I'm very like forthcoming about my own life in some ways, and so maybe there's part of that. There's always like a hook in, but sometimes there's also a really great list of questions in the back of Women's Ways of Knowing, which is the interview protocol that they used, and a lot of those questions are very quick entries into a deep conversation. There's also another list of questions that a student brought to me, and he had found it as on a website. It was like 36 questions to make anybody fall in love with you. and that actually works pretty well too.
Hi, thanks for the talks today. First, a comment, I think, quickly on the conversation that George had raised about how do you get people to grasp something that seems ungraspable when they're trying to solve. There was a professor that I had over at MIT who used to call it sync time, and it was in a discipline in analytics that I found really, really challenging. And it was very comforting to me on the student side when he said, sometimes there's, and this is probably a very non-technical way of describing what you were describing on sort of the degrees of the functioning of the brain, but just sync time. Sometimes your brain needs a longer period of time in which to allow this information to sink in, or to allow that skill set of quantitative analytics and reasoning to sink in before it will click. But that confidence piece of, I have confidence that you will all get there.
Yes.
Right? It's about that level of effort in getting there, which I found really reassuring, particularly in his class, because it was daunting. I think that the piece that you added in at the very end, Mike, about, this is sort of the evaluations that I give, and I share them to all students. This is something that I've been wrestling with, which is there are exemplary examples throughout the course of somebody that's really just added huge value to a classroom blog, to really made a very deep personal investment in the topic that is being covered at that moment in time. And I've struggled with how to recognize, share, or highlight that in the context of a larger class, right? So both with the concern of I don't want to embarrass the person who made a deep personal investment in something and point out that they've had a transformative experience, but, and also because just in the sequence of the class, usually I've looked at it and analyzed it a week after it's already been submitted and we've sort of moved on. And so I'm curious about how you can highlight those investments that are being made by the students and your recognition of that.
Mm-hmm. So for me, what I worry about is that might lead students towards performance goals, comparison of their performance with others. It sounds like the way Mike does it is very different. It's a small group. They've all worked together on a big project, and it doesn't sound like you're saying, Jerry did super well, Jane did not. But yeah, so highlighting the accomplishments of an individual is not the way that I personally go, because I'm focusing on mastery.
So in that small class, like, everybody knows who that person was. They all know, like, who stepped out and did this amazing thing. So I'll read just real quick something. I'll read just a few lines from his. So I point out, like, I start off by, your mind is quick and agile. Such skills are mysterious to me. I have no access to them. My joke, like these words I'm typing now, are planned days, if not weeks in advance. You're funny because you're willing to take chances the rest of us won't take, and you take them instantly without hesitation, catching us off guard. All of this makes you instantly likable and a natural leader. It goes on here, and then, but the thing that I said at the end, I think, which is pertinent to this, is it says, leadership may be your gift, but just remember the wisdom of Kay's dad. This is a resident at Meadowlark, and she's a 89-year-old feminist, which is somewhat rare in Kansas. And she says, and what she said holds just as true for you as it does for anybody else. Quote, you are every bit as good as anybody else out there, male or female, and not one bit better.
Let's talk about group projects. A lot of us try to give students that extra space to develop that sense of wonder by working with their peers on a group project. And you can try the totally unstructured, this is the kind of thing I want you to do, versus here's a lot of milestones to make sure everyone's doing something every week. And any insights from you on how to get that sense of wonder going on in a group project, we'd love to hear.
So I won't speak to wonder necessarily, but what I try to do is I give a grade for the student's own contribution to the project, as well as a grade to the overall project, just to keep everybody motivated to help each other. And one way that I've done that is to give feedback, to give grades on students' feedback of each other's work. This doesn't get to wonder, but.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, so I've in big classes, you can set up anonymous systems where students can essentially grade each other's contribution on the project. This is for like really big projects where you can't possibly know personally how the project went. So especially my classes of 200 to 400, we do stuff like that. I think there are a lot of ways to screw up group projects, and as a teacher in the way that you set it up. And in general, though, if you can set it up in a way that there's a project that everybody cares deeply about, it's all done, right? But that almost never happens. Usually there's people who don't care, or they're too busy, or whatever, and they find a way to freeload. And so that's where you have to counter the freeloader problem with some mechanism. The best mechanism is, of course, just being right there with them and being excited about the project with them and working with them, and then it's pretty straightforward. But any time where there's no actual engagement, then you need a mechanism, and that's where it gets hard. That's a good way to do it. I like the student evaluation piece.
Yeah, for me, the group project, each individual has their own piece. That's something that they've selected, and then they all integrate it together. So that helps to instill wonder if they're picking something that really lights their fire.
And the tricky thing is then creating a space wide enough that they can find something they truly want to do. It's not just a selection among 3 things that you know, it's like something that is core to their passion. And the challenge then becomes like, you got to make sure they're not just doing something they're good at, but challenges them as well. And
or an essay they've handed in for another class.
Yeah. Like you see that a lot. And so somehow you have to, I mean, all this comes back to how do you create the person who wants to grow, who's willing to take those chances, and that's hard.
So it is possible to shift someone's mindset from fixed to growth mindset. Carol Dweck has some work on this, actually.
Mike, I was really intrigued and actually quite moved by what we saw in the video of the students living with the elderly people. But I was also just wondering if you could talk about how you even made that happen. Yeah. I can't imagine, and I'm picturing IRBs and, you know, one of the young people knocks over one of the people in a walker or something. I mean, how did that happen, and what challenges did you face in it? What gave you the idea? I just thought it really made me cry.
Yeah, it was like a coming together of a lot of people who are in very similar situations trying to make old institutions better. So basically, I found my counterpart in the nursing home industry, somebody who's trying to transform nursing homes into something that, you know, it's part of, if you're familiar with like the Eden Alternative, or if you've been looking at these kinds of things, the Pioneer Network, it's a very like sort of progressive, cutting edge kind of vision of what a nursing home could be. And that's what we have just off campus. And there's a woman there that's my age and I just very much see her as my counterpart, and she struggles in the same way that I struggle within higher ed. She struggles within that industry. So what happened was I went and gave a talk up there just as a sort of community service thing. A lot of K-State professors go up and give talks at this place. And just in the discussion that followed, I realized what a vibrant community it was. And by that, I mean there were these fantastic arguments and cliques and like stuff like one woman said, like I was talking in a room like this, and apparently I was looking this way the whole time, and somebody over here says, "Excuse me, can you look at us now and then?" And then this woman over here says, "Oh, forget her, she's always acting up." And that's when I realized, like, oh, this is a village. This is like this is an anthropological experience. And so right after my talk, I started talking to people about this would be amazing to get people up here. And they were just starting to experiment with the idea of intergenerational living. And they thought, perfect. So there were giant hurdles to leap, but we got through them all. And a lot of lucky breaks. The guy who runs our IRB has also done research in the same space. So he really, walked us through all the steps and making sure we could get there and so on. So it was just a lot of pieces falling together that worked out.
Another question from Twitter. What about pre-post testing? Useful for meeting students where they are, for skill development, promoting deep learning resilience?
I think it's a fantastic idea. I keep meaning to implement it in my own classes. And pre-post testing, not in terms of just content, but really skills, the underlying skills.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I love doing it. And I mean, the way that I do it is actually very personal in a way. I have students like write their own life story, and then we go through this class, and at the end, I hope they have more insight on who they are. So I have them write their life story again and look back at their own life story. So it's self-assessed, and it's not quite the same thing as a pre-test, post-test. I also do the classic pre-test, post-test kind of stuff, but that one in particular is the students really respond well to.
One thing we've been thinking about doing is pre-test, post-test for an intro programming class, actually, just to see what kind of general skills in reasoning actually emerge over time.
That's great.
So the question I wanted to ask is kind of following up on that a little bit with resilience. I actually posed the Twitter question you just answered, which I appreciate. So I might ask a follow-up question. What strategies and kind of insight do you have on questions students who are really struggling? So I feel like in my time at BC, I'm encountering more students who are encountering physical, mental illness kinds of struggles, more requests for accommodations, more students who don't seem to be entering with the skills that I kind of anticipate them entering with. So I'm wondering what kind of insight and strategies you have about working with students who are really struggling, working with them on your own, helping them set timetables, making references to institutional resources and that kind of thing.
Those are, I mean, we accept 99% of our students at K-State. So I'm not sure who we're denying, but it's a huge span of students. We also are, over the last 20 years or so, among public universities, have the highest numbers of top scholarships in terms of like Rhodes and all that. So we have these incredible scholars, right down to like people who need a tremendous amount of remediation. And so that's, for us, that's been like, I mean, that's been an institutional problem, and I feel like we've done a really good job at it because of our position and our land grant mission. So we have a lot of resources on our campus, and I don't know if you have the same kind of resources, but in general, there's a certain level that I know I can help with, but there's also a certain level at which I send them to the writing center, or I send them to the math remediation, or whatever it is that they might need. So we have those resources. That's not a great answer, but
yeah, we have some of those resources as well, but not enough. I mean, it's very easy at a big school like Berkeley to just fall through the cracks, and if I'm teaching a large class, there's not much I can do. But the school is invested now in trying to create a new center for the science of learning that would really try to take some of this science to help students who are struggling. So we'll see if we get that off the ground.
I think it's also useful, I think, to go back to the question from the economics professor earlier, and that is, if you happen to have your own work from when you were a first-year student, go back and look at it. Mine is terrible, and and it reminds me to like have empathy for these first-year students and where they're at.
I wanted to foreground a little bit something that's been flowing throughout a lot of the discussion, which is the issue of affect or emotion. You just mentioned empathy, and many of the stories are rich with emotional complexity and depth, whether it's the student who's suffering from so much depression and anxiety and trying to hold it together, or I think the clear emotional connection that you're building with students. So I'm wondering if either of you have things to say about either the role of affect or emotion with the way the mind works, and how to what extent you explicitly try to promote or engage emotional intelligence, emotional presence, or awareness per se, versus it's just part of the landscape that you engage through other means as you're explicit about things.
So affect obviously ties in very closely both with stress and with motivation. And if your motivation is to come to class and learn from someone inspiring like Mike, or to come and do a group project with other students, that's probably the most powerful motivation that we have as social creatures, is our peers. And so I think it's absolutely essential.
Yeah, and I actually, in my field at least, I find emotional intelligence and all kinds of affect immensely important in terms of getting to insights. So for example, if we're doing field work with the elderly, you really have to know yourself in order to know the person across from you a little bit more deeply, to know what interesting questions to ask. So I find it essential as an anthropologist to actually do a lot of like soul work, so to speak, and understand who you are and how you got there so that you can encounter another person more deeply.
And you're explicit about that with students?
I'm very explicit about
and
it.
have them develop that too.
And it's hard to be explicit about it, and there's not a lot of stuff out there right now to help you be explicit about it. So in many ways, we're all like in the process of finding the right language. But you know, in anthropology, I teach 6 skills, and there's 6 now. There were, you know, 7 5 weeks ago. It's like evolving all the time. And you know, I'm like moving things around and changing the wording and all that stuff. And the students are okay with that because they know we're exploring this thing. But the 6 things are things like seeing your own seeing, which is knowing your own biases and assumptions, there's a lot of affect involved with that. Seeing their seeing, like empathy and exercising a sense of empathy. Seeing the big picture, which is much more straightforward, understanding historical context and bigger picture stuff. Seeing how little things matter, so an anthropologist wants to be very observant. We look at a person and look at their shoes and the way they tie them and actually try to see that as a symbol of something, right? And then go on to things like the bigger ones are seeing that we make the world, which is to say that all these words and concepts and so on shape how we think, and that we created these concepts, we continually use them, and then we're recreating that framework for seeing the world, but we can get outside of it. And then the last one is seeing not just that we create the world, but how we create the world. So the strategies and negotiations that people from different positions might take as they negotiate these different values and so on that are all implicit in the way that we talk and think and so on. All of that, it requires a lot of diving into your own self and seeing how you see the world, and also getting past your own barriers, which can be emotional and so on. So yeah, we're very explicit about it.
I wonder how we could better reward students for helping other students who are not there yet, especially in a larger group setting where they don't necessarily form such strong bonds.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder if that's something we can do.
We do have larger structures facing us, and one of them is that there's lunch waiting for us very soon at noon. What I'm thinking is if I can throw in one more question from the Twitter feed, and then perhaps we can get one more question from the audience after that, if there is one. Question from Twitter, again, dealing with larger structures. We live in a larger structure where there are certain expectations placed on us as faculty. How do we convince the administration regarding not yet grading or got it grading in a world that is oriented toward a 4.0 grade scale?
Yeah. My approach has been that a lot of times people don't actually know what I'm doing in the classroom. And in practice, the not yet grading does not result in everybody getting an A. There's a lot of incompletes, which is probably the most awkward kind of flag. But a lot of students will get to the end of the semester and just be like, you know, I didn't make it, I don't have it in me, I'm not really interested in this anymore, you know, whatever it might be. And they'll just, at that point, I move into contractual. About 3 weeks left in the semester, I move into like a contract grading kind of mode, where I meet with students who are not clearly going to get the A. And we basically say like, okay, you can either do this and get a B, this and get a C, this and get a D, and so on. And it all like comes out, and so at the end of the day, there's nothing there that necessarily looks amiss.
There's some research showing that students come into a class already knowing what grade they're aiming for, and their final grade actually does tend to match up pretty well. And it's surprising, but some people do go in, you know, hoping, expecting to get a B or whatever.
One more question back.
I'm an online graduate student from Georgetown, honored to be working with the nursing education department here. I'm wondering if your theories apply to distance education students, and particularly motivation and the social isolation.
I think there's an afternoon session devoted to that. Is that right? Or no? I think someone's going to be talking about that this afternoon.
I have not done it. I have a very good friend and colleague that I worked with in creating his course, Distance Ed, and I think so. And I've also, so in that course, I've actually been the key advisor for a handful of students. And those handful of students are actually war veterans who are 100% disabled and suffer PTSD and can't come to campus and be around people for very long. And I think the way that he's organized that class, which does require quite a bit of social interaction, but mediated through the medium itself, like discussion boards and so on, has actually nurtured those people quite a bit. And I've started to see them on campus, and they're very grateful for that stepping stone, you know. But I think more to your question, I think, what's that?
No,
oh, yeah.
go ahead.
I think it's these elements that Sylvia's brought up are critical. So extrinsic motivation, the need for social connection, and so on, those are all critical, whether it's in an online environment or not. And that makes it both, there are affordances and challenges to the online environment.
So there are a number of new online degree programs at Berkeley, and this is something that I've been on a panel reviewing them, and one has been extremely successful. And what differentiates it from the others is that students all come to campus and live on campus for a week. When they start, they get to know each other, and then they go away and they have online discussions where they can all see each other, and that's a very big part of it, is the group interactions, group work. And then at the end of the year, they come back for another week on campus, just living in there, spending a lot of time together. And that social piece seems to be the glue that holds it all together.
Can we offer some thanks to Mike and Sylvia? And thanks also to all of you for engaging in this conversation. The conversation continues. Many of us are headed to Lions Hall for lunch, and then we have workshops this afternoon. I do want to put in a plug, though. This day is not the only day when we want to think about excellence in teaching at BC. We in the center are eager to provide programming for faculty that meets you where you are. So if questions or concerns or themes or topics or anything like that, if any of that has come up today, please send me an email or send an email to the Center for Teaching at bc.edu or the Twitter feed, or find ways to get your ideas to us. We're eager to build programming not only out of today's event, but also along other themes as well. Hope to see you all at lunch. Thank you.